And we are live here on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. What's up, guys? Nick Script on the P2W Fantasy Podcast, doing a solo show, mailbag episode. So I like to do a mix of things this offseason. I like to host and have, one or two guests on, and then I like to talk a lot myself so that there's a mixture of me talking too much and letting some other people talk. But I got some great questions here today from the fantasy football community that I'm going to go through. And should be a good show. As always, this podcast is partnered up with the Fantasy Points Media Group, which is part of the Fantasy Points branch in itself. Go check out fantasypoints.com. One-stop shop for all of your fantasy needs. If you're an NFL fan, year-round player, just a redraft player, they got great stuff on there. Fantasypoints.com/subscribe. You can use my promo code P2W22 for a discount. Like I said, mailbag episode. We'll get into that in a second.
I play to win, no fear to give. I feel but I can't forgive. I go all in this time, yeah, I won't regret. I'll pick the best on trip, they don't understand. I play to win, yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Oh, play to win, I play to win. Yeah, I play to win, I play to win.
So a little raspy. I'm going to get through it, though. I think it's the allergies kicking in. And I have these mini water bottles that I unintentionally bought for some reason from Costco. But mailbag episode today, just me. Should be a good show. We have a lot of good questions here. Just going to jump right into it. I'm going to say the Twitter user that asked me the question, and then my opinion on some of these. There's a good mix of things for redraft dynasty, the upcoming class, some good stuff here. So let's kick it off with the first question, and it's from at OBJ_Juan_Mahomie. Good play on words there. Who scores more points this year, Carr or Cousins? So we're looking at more of a redraft focus question here, Carr or Cousins. So in 2021, Carr finishes the QB12. He averaged 15.98 fantasy points. Kirk Cousins finished as the QB11. He averaged 19.03 fantasy points. He played one less game than Derek Carr. Looking at Derek Carr last season, I was trying to look at who he had for some of these games. And the 23-20 win over the Colts in January, his receiving core was Zay Jones, Hunter Renfrow, and Josh Jacobs in terms of who had the most amount of work. He had Foster, Moreau out there. Deshaun Jackson was out there just like running around and stuff. And it's interesting to see like him be able to be useful in the fantasy world. Maybe not your top tier Justin Herbert and Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, but he produced to a decent degree here with lesser weapons. And now we look ahead. Davante Adams, his old college teammate, Darren Waller, hopefully healthy, who missed a ton of time this past season, and then Hunter Renfrow, who had a very, very nice 2021. Comparing the two, Carr and Cousins, Carr had a better completion percentage. He averaged more completions, attempts, and passing yards. The separation from Carr to Cousins in Cousins' favor was the touchdowns. He had 10 more overall, and he averaged more touchdowns. I think the passing yards upside is similar. Both had 6 games of 300-plus passing yards in 2021. It's just that touchdown category. So if we look at two guys that might be similar in passing yards and attempts and in those categories, and we see a difference in touchdowns, but then we notice that Darren Waller missed a lot of time last season. They didn't really have wide receivers. They lost Henry Ruggs. Brian Edwards still hasn't done much. Hunter Renfrow is not, this massive red zone monster or anything like that. Now you add Davante Adams and Darren Waller, both for Derek Carr. I think he can have that upstick in touchdowns. So this is the classic battle of the underrated quarterbacks, but I'm going to go Derek Carr for this one. Good question. Next one at 87_carry. How do you rank the dynasty running backs between RB2 and RB5? That's an interesting question. A lot of rankings coming out. I've been trying to drop my dynasty rankings throughout the offseason. Just little clips of, rough drafts of them because they seem to change often, and they will continue to change even through the NFL draft and, more news through the offseason. But I'm assuming that we feel JT Jonathan Taylor is number 1. So when I look at Dynasty rankings, and everybody's rankings are going to be different, and that's fine because Dynasty is different person to person. People have different windows of how they value players. People have different valuation in terms of who they are trying to target because of the state of their team. Age is more important to some people in comparison to other people. It's the beauty of Dynasty that there are no right answers. In redraft, you know exactly what's up. You know what's going on a weekly basis. You know who is scoring what points, and it's a more black and white sort of game in comparison to Dynasty. So how I approach Dynasty is I rank running backs, wide receivers, whatever the case is, in order of how I would take them in a startup draft, right? So we'll assume Jonathan Taylor's number 1, and now they're asking for the next couple guys. So I'm one of the biggest DeAndre Swift stands out there. I think he is a running back that can do everything. He didn't get the rushing work that some of the other guys did, but he had tremendous passing involvement. And I think he will still be used in that aspect of the game. He also had those 2 huge rushing days, and I think he is a better rusher than people give him credit for. I think, in terms of an all-around back, I think DeAndre Swift is that guy, so I'm going to put him number 2. Naji Harris had a great rookie season, even with a questionable offensive line and, a quarterback that doesn't raise ceilings necessarily. So I think Naji Harris, for me, would be that number 3. Christian McCaffrey, in my opinion, is still, in a healthy world, the most talented running back in the league. And that, I don't know if that's a hot take or not. A lot of people will say, no, it's definitely Jonathan Taylor, or, Derrick Henry's the best, ground and pound running back in the league. But if we look at Christian McCaffrey, in terms of a perfectly healthy world and a guy that is an elite pass catcher and an elite rusher, it's still Christian McCaffrey. So, age comes in a factor, injury history comes in a factor. But if I go Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, Naji Harris, I think for me, Christian McCaffrey is right after those guys, hoping for a healthy season. And then the next one is kind of, I've been juggling this a little bit this offseason, because a lot of you guys have Javonte Williams as number 2 or 3. And I think he has displayed that he is a very, very good running back, and that given work, he produces. And I completely agree with that. It's just the sample size is kind of small, and we don't know what's going on in Denver. Is it still going to be another year of Melvin Gordon? Is it not? I think in a world where we see Javonte Williams being a workhorse, then it's more clear cut where he can be in rankings. And, some might say, well, one day he will be, but maybe. But I also look at a guy like Austin Eckler, who is attached to a Justin Herbert quarterback that he has a clear connection with in the passing game. And everything I do is PPR. So I'm speaking PPR here. But look at a guy like Austin Eckler, who has a really, really defined role in his offense and has a great quarterback, and he gets a ton of receiving work, and he's also starting to get goal line work. And I'm juggling those two. So I've been debating that. So I'd say JT, DeAndre Swift, Najee Harris, Christian McCaffrey, and then Javonte or Eckler. It's one of those two. And I can go into the whys of why each guy should be in those spots for me personally, but we got a bunch of questions there. But again, if I had to rank those guys, that's where I'd put them. Next is at DeBoys_22, and this is a guy I've talked to once or twice on Twitter. He asks an interesting question, and I feel like this is something that a lot of people would debate. I'll run through it in my thought process for it, but he asks Jalen Hurts or the 101 of this rookie class. So if you had the 101 pick in a Superflex, he says, so a Superflex league, if you don't play in a Superflex league, is a league where you can start more than one quarterback. He asks Jalen Hurts or the 101. So the 101, debatable. A lot of people, say it's Breece Hall, the running back, Iowa State. A lot of people say it's the Liberty quarterback, Malik Willis. There's other people that really like some of these wide receivers. So you can go in a lot of different directions with that 101. I think the state of my team is an important factor, obviously, for this. do I have the quarterbacks do I have quarterbacks so that I can go and take Breece Hall, who a lot of people say is the 101? Do I have Jalen Hurts and then maybe 2 and a third other guy that I can be safe with on my fantasy team? Then it might be, an easier decision for me if let's say I have I keep saying Justin Herbert for some reason. Let's say I got Joe Burrow, another, mid-range quarterback, and then a third one that is a starter as well, but that, doesn't have a great ceiling. Then I might be questioning it. But maybe I have like a Joe Burrow and a Lamar Jackson, and then Jalen Hurts was my third quarterback just on my roster, not in any sort of order. Now I have some flexibility to say, hey, you know what? What makes my team better? Jalen Hurts, even though I have these other 2 quarterbacks I can use, or Breece Hall that I can start right away? Because maybe you're juggling your quarterbacks every week, and Breece Hall becomes a guy that you don't juggle every week. He's going to be in your lineup every single game. That's a factor. But let's talk about Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts finishes the QB8 overall and QB7 in points per game. If we're going to weigh out, versus Malik Willis, let's say that's who I'm juggling right here. It's a lateral move for me to a degree because I'm giving up a quarterback to get a quarterback, and the guy I'm giving up, I've seen things out of. And Malik Willis, I think, is going to have a nice fantasy value. I think he's going to bring a lot to the fantasy world, and in terms of that dual threat ability and the athleticism. But give me the guy I know that's a starter as well in 2022. And there might be some questions about Jalen Hurts and the Eagles long term, but I know he's their guy in 2022. I know that they have a lot of picks to assist Jalen Hurts in that offensive system. And I've seen some really good things for him in the fantasy world already in the NFL. We know the elite rushing upside, number 1 in carries, number 1 in red zone carries, number 1 in rushing yards, number 1 in rushing touchdowns. That's a lot of ones. Number 15 in yards per attempt, number 3 in air yards per attempt, which could be a big factor with an added weapon. Number 17 in deep ball completion, number 10 in deep ball accuracy. So some of those are like okay or decent. But I think looking at the state of that offense for the Eagles this past season, I think adding a weapon, you're starting to think like, hey, year 2 of Devonta, Dallas Goedert's a good offensive weapon. Maybe they add another rookie receiver. Number 12 in red zone completion percentage. So I think the stigma on Hurts is that he's not the best of passers, but I feel like he's shown us a decent amount this season to say, hey, if the efficiency is a little bit more consistent, this guy can be all right. And when you have a rushing floor like this guy does, I like him a lot for fantasy. So to me, that 101, if you're trying to trade for that 101 or you have that 101, I might be looking at at the flip side on draft day in your rookie draft. If you have that 101, you could probably get Hurts plus something. And the reason I say that is because, I've talked about it a lot before. When people get drafted, we have the NFL draft. When we have our rookie dynasty drafts, the price of those picks goes sky high. So if you are looking at it 1-for-1, that 101 on draft day in your rookie dynasty league, because everybody wants to draft, nobody wants to just watch everybody else draft, the value is going to be huge. So you might be able to kind of win on the flip side of this if you can get Jalen Hurts plus something for that 101. But if you had Jalen Hurts, again, I think it just depends on a lot of those factors before: the state of your team, what happens, with what you draft versus what you had, a lot of different factors. That's an interesting question, though. I think that came up more than once. Next one, at Bill Bros Swaggins, Kenneth Walker or Breece Hall for rookie drafts. So these are the 2 guys that most people feel are the top 2 dogs in the draft class for the running back position. Kenneth Walker from Michigan State, Breece Hall from Iowa State. We mentioned Hall earlier and a couple times before. Let's weigh these 2 guys out. So Breece Hall has had 897, 1572, and 1472 rushing yards the last 3 years, 3,941 total in those 3 years. Kenneth Walker, he's had 579. That's 2 exactly on the dot rushing yard totals for his first 2 years playing, and then 1636 rushing yards, which is higher than any of Breece Hall seasons. The last 3 years, which total 2,794 total rushing yards. Hall has 56 scrimmage touchdowns. Walker has had 36. Big difference, receptions. 82 career college receptions for Breece Hall, 19 career receptions for Walker. So we can go through the nitpick. This guy does this with his hips. This guy's acceleration is this. This guy's broken tackles are this. I think that the fact that Breece Hall has the workhorse ability and that he might be the only true workhorse in this class is the separator for me. When a guy has 82 receptions, regardless of who he's playing, on a weekly basis, I think that just shows, hey, this guy can do it all. And when you want a running back, coming into the NFL, you don't want a guy that's only going to be, primarily used in one aspect of the game. I think when you look at Walker versus Hall, that's the big separation for me is, hey, one guy can be a true workhorse. The other guy, maybe not so much. And we've seen guys in the past develop into pass catchers to a degree. We've seen guys that have, progressed in that aspect of the game. But again, when you're profiling the two guys, we can weigh out the stats, we can weigh out the qualities, but I want the workhorse. So I'm going to go Breece Hall there, and I feel like that's pretty consensus at this point. At FF Shane B, what's your favorite exercise to do? So I didn't want to jump into this too much. I can go talk about, bicep workouts for, getting a nice pump and, squatting heavy. And I like doing a lot of cable workouts, but I wanted just to throw it out there on a live stream. Briefly, why I do all this P2W fit. I kind of push myself away from the old hashtag because I feel like it kind of died off. But the reason I put those videos all the time on Twitter is, and some guy I got a troll that always comments on my stuff and it's funny to me because it's another grown man sitting in his house talking about another grown man, and he's done the same for other guys. So it's just it's comical. I don't care. But he said something oh, you're just showing off all the time, or you want attention from those videos. No, I don't give a shit, man. I'm married. I got a kid. I got another job. I got stuff going on. I'm coaching too. I got a lot of stuff going on that I don't need attention from anybody. The reason I do that, though, is because I've had so many DM conversations about people just asking about fitness related stuff or shooting the shit about hey, give me some advice on this or here. And I'm not an expert by any means. I just do it all the time. And I always have, I was a college soccer player at a higher level. I coach college, fitness has always been a big thing for me. So if it annoys some people, it is what it is. Because at the end of the day, if it annoys 10 people, but 2 people get motivated, it's worth it for me. And I don't need any motivation or any eyes on me about it. But I feel like I've had a lot of positive feedback from that stuff. And it's been a little bit motivating for some people. I've had some great probably 75 conversations over the last 2 years about fitness related stuff from the fantasy community, people back home, whatever. So it's worth it to me. But I want to throw that question out there just because I post videos all the time. It's probably annoying. But again, I'll be annoying if it helps anybody. I genuinely mean that. I'm not a bullshitter by any means. So that's a good question there. All right, next one. Back to fantasy football. At NBF_Clo, he asks, and he's tearing my heartstrings with this one. DJ Moore or Elijah Moore? The battle of the Moores. And this is a tough question for me because I have traditionally been a huge DJ Moore guy. I have a signed helmet. I have his jersey before he changed his number on me. But I'm also a massive, massive Elijah Moore guy. Also have his jersey. I've also put out way too much content about Elijah Moore. But let's look at some rankings. So Fantasy Pros, I checked them out today. Dynasty Rankings had them in the same tier. They had DJ Moore at 14 and Elijah Moore at 17 overall for the wide receiver position in DJ Moore's favor for this. But again, same tier. The last Dynasty Rankings I made, so I think it was a few weeks back, I had DJ Moore at 14 and Elijah Moore at 15. So I feel like I'm pretty high on Elijah Moore. DJ Moore, I've seen a big difference in rankings. Some guys are, he's a number 10 guy. Some guys are no, he's closer to 20. I mean, I've seen a mixture of things, but that's what I had last time. DJ Moore 14, Elijah Moore 15. Dynasty rankings need to be changed all the time and adjusted, and you need to pivot. So I need to re-examine those, but that was my last one. So this past season, we saw hot streaks for both guys. DJ opened the season really hot. Wide receiver 4 overall, weeks 1 through 4. He averaged 22.4 fantasy points during that stretch. Elijah Moore, weeks 9 through 13, was the wide receiver 2 overall. He averaged 20.1 fantasy points during that stretch. Guy was balling out with 4 different Jets quarterbacks. I always like to throw that out there. That hot stretch for Elijah Moore, he scored 5 touchdowns. DJ Moore, on the other hand, only scored 4 the entire year. You know, as of right now, what is today? April 5th, 8:17 p.m. Central. They're both the wide receiver 1s in their team. Could that change? Probably not as much for DJ Moore. For Elijah Moore, if they go on the Jets draft a guy at number 10, then maybe there's, the conversation who's like going to be the number 1 guy in targets. I still probably would lean Elijah Moore. But, as of right now today, they both are that wide receiver 1 on their team. The difference for me when ranking these guys, I love Elijah Moore. I think he's going to have a massive year. He's number 1. I can't say one of my number 1s because you can't have multiple number 1s, but he's one of my biggest trade targets this offseason because he missed a lot of time at the end of the season. People forget what guys did when they, missed time and weren't there for the fantasy playoffs, but he's one of my biggest buys right now, especially not knowing what's going on with the Jets. But DJ Moore, wide receiver 18 this year, wide receiver 23 last year, wide receiver 12 in 2019. He's 24, Elijah's 22. I've just seen DJ Moore finish well for the position, even with sketchy quarterbacks, situations. So again, I'll probably lean DJ Moore here, but again, my rankings said 14 and 15. So that means they're in the same tier. They're neck and neck for me. And that's crazy to say because Elijah Moore's performance window was small, but I was high on him coming into the year. I'm still high on his talent. I think he's an absolute baller. I think he's going to have a great career. These guys are neck and neck. I just separate them by DJ Moore showing me, a few years of being fantasy productive within the top 20 wide receivers or so, even with sketchy quarterback situations. All right, next one. At Michael_Sox, he had a couple questions. I grabbed one of them. Really appreciative of all these guys that ask questions. But he said, what is Antonio Gibson's trade value? I have 2 picks in each of the first 3 rounds this year. Gibson owner wants the 2 1s. So the Gibson owner wants 2 first-round picks. I think that's too much. Thoughts? So this is interesting. So Gibson, RB12 last year, he averaged 13.8 fantasy points. He had 7 games above that during the fantasy season. I think with this Gibson manager, he wants 2 first-round picks. It's tough, right? It's tough because, I don't know if this guy has the 101 and the 112 or anything in between. What I would do, and I always encourage this for fantasy trades, identify the team need and how you can possibly fill that team need of the opposing manager. So it doesn't mean that they need a wide receiver, so you give them your best wide receiver, or it doesn't mean that they need a tight end, so you give them Mark Andrews. It doesn't mean that necessarily, but you need to look at the makeup of their roster, which does not happen enough in the fantasy world. We don't look at each other's teams enough. We just look at a calculator, or we look at, on paper, this for this seems good. When in reality, like maybe that manager doesn't need what you're sending him, even if it is a good trade. So identify the team need and then use one of your picks. And I would say maybe the later one to start things off with and go from there. Dynasty trading is a negotiation process at times. I like to get them over and done with. I don't like to get, low ball and then see what they'll do and then try to, sell for way higher than I don't like to go back and forth like that, but you need to do, you do need to test the water. So, if you have the 105 through the 108 in a small piece for depth that they can use, maybe that's something you look for because, again, running backs are very hard to come across in fantasy, in terms of trading for a top 12 to 15 running back. But again, what's the timing of the year? What's the window of the year? It's almost NFL draft time. It's almost rookie draft time. So those picks weigh some heavy value. If you have the 110 through the 112, can you give them a solidified flex option with that to get Antonio Gibson? Again, running backs are tough to trade for, but understand the value of your picks right now. So I wouldn't send 2 picks. If it was the 111 and the 112 and Antonio Gibson will 100% or 90% or 70% help you win a championship next season, then maybe you think about it. But if you got the 103 and the 112, I'm not doing that just because I feel like the value is too high sending 2 picks of guys that you can lock in as starters on your team. So, again, I'd be looking for what they need, using one of the picks, and working from there, which hopefully is not too general. Next one is Raphael Kamak. First pick of a 4-team standard scoring keeper league, which is tough for me because I don't ever play standard stuff. So this is tough. Keeper is already Justin Jefferson in the 10th round. Would you entertain a receiver with the first pick? So it sounds to me like he's got Justin Jefferson, and that's his 10th round pick because this league is a keeper league, which means that you select, however many keepers that the league allows. So some keeper leagues, like I'm in one that has 3, but their draft position is not where you drafted them. It's where they're going the following year. This one, it sounds like it's wherever he drafted that player. So he once drafted Justin Jefferson in the 10th. So that's the pick he loses in his next draft. Sounds like he only keeps 1, though. So Justin Jefferson in the 10th, absolutely have to pick that because if he was being drafted today, he's probably in the 1st, right? Justin Jefferson. He asks in here, would you entertain a receiver with the first pick? So I like the strategy. I've seen a lot of different people talk about it in the offseason, and I'm with it to a certain level. But the anchor strategy, meaning that you get your solidified guy for a position, and then you can wait a little bit to draft somebody for the same position later because you already have that stud, and you just find guys within the draft to pair with them. So I would have your anchor wide receiver, your stud wide receiver be Justin Jefferson. And then if you have the first pick, receiver with the first pick, if you have the first overall pick, I think you're taking Jonathan Taylor because that way you have your solidified running back 1, the best in the league in terms of fantasy, based off of what he did last season and all the stats that he was crazy efficient with. Jonathan Taylor, second highest scoring player in fantasy for all skill positions, only behind Cooper Kupp. Red zone opportunity was insane this year. Volume is king. The rushing days were amazing. The touchdowns were great. I would love to have Justin Jefferson, anchor wide receiver, Jonathan Taylor, anchor running back. Now, if he's got the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th pick, I think I'd still be leaning taking a running back because then you know that you have a solidified guy in both of those positions, and then you can build your team around that. I'd rather do that than have 2 stud wide receivers and be kind of depleted at the running back position, especially if you're only keeping 1 guy. You got to keep that in mind. It's almost like a redraft league if you're only keeping 1 guy for this keeper league. So I go for the running back. If that guy ends up being Jonathan Taylor because you have the first pick, or you wait a bit and you got a guy like Austin Eckler or somebody else that's going to be a good redraft running back next season, even Derrick Henry potentially, or how you value these guys. I would do that. It would be intriguing to have both Jefferson and Chase on the same team, but again, I feel like it helps you be a more stable fantasy lineup when you have a solidified RB1, solidified wide receiver 1, which you could do in this draft. Keeping this next one quick, but at Trip Play Fantasy, so Triple Play Fantasy. What's your favorite fantasy sport between football, baseball, and basketball? So fantasy football is my 101. I just have to say that most of my content is fantasy football. What I do for baseball and basketball is primarily waivers and then just like some random talk about different players and their fantasy performances, things like that. Pretty casual for me as a content creator for baseball and basketball. It's primarily football, but I play all three. I'm in 2 leagues for basketball and baseball. Football, I don't know, too many. But I wanted to answer this question just because I feel like if you love fantasy football and you're interested in other sports, test out these other sports because at some point the fantasy football season is winding down and then it's fantasy basketball season. So you can jump right into playing fantasy, just a different sport, and it makes you more interested in watching that sport on TV and keeping up with the sport. You know, when I am competing against guys in fantasy basketball, I'm paying attention way more to basketball than I would be if I wasn't. I mean, I do a lot of betting stuff, but, you know, playing fantasy basketball makes me pay attention to the grand scheme of the basketball world in general. And then as basketball is fading out, then starts fantasy baseball. So it's like you always have something to play. And even if you play Dynasty fantasy football, you're active, right, in the offseason, but you're not active every single day. I mean, you might try to be, but you're not making deals every day or wire moves every day. So I would encourage everybody to try everything out. I tried fantasy hockey like 2 years ago, and it was a lot of fun. I came in second place. I paid attention to guys more than I did. I didn't join it again because not a lot of people were interested in doing it. But again, it all transitions. Football to basketball to baseball. Keeps you involved in sports, keeps you involved in fantasy, and it's a lot of fun just to play fantasy sports. So it's a good question to talk about something bigger there. All right, last one here. I had a bunch of questions, but I didn't want to go too long on a solo podcast here, especially with my wheezing going. I don't know if you can hear that on the mic or not. But at Coach Bruce, my guy, name one sleeper for each position. Oh, it's a tough ask. QB ranked outside the top 25, running back outside the top 50, wide receiver outside the top 75, and tight end outside the 20. So I tried looking at a website, Fantasy Football Calculator for ADP. I might be off on some of these, but we'll start things off. So my QB outside of the top 25 sleeper, I'm going to go Davis Mills. So 30.77% of Davis Mills games played this past season, he had 300-plus passing yards. 4 times he had that mark, which was more than Russell Wilson, Jalen Hurts, Carson Wentz, Trevor Lawrence, Ryan Tannehill, Kyler Murray, Mac Jones, and tied with Aaron Rodgers and Matt Ryan. Very impressive. I mean, we're talking about a guy that nobody really was expecting much out of this year. If anything, you know, we had the Watson issue. I think, you know, months before the season started, we figured he was going to be part of the picture and play. Then, you know, Tyrod Taylor was announced starter. He looked pretty good out the gate. He got banged up, and then it was Davis Mills. And for Davis Mills to hit that passing upside mark, and I talked about passing upside before in an article and also some data I put on Twitter, but you know, I categorized passing upside by 300 plus passing yards or 3 plus passing touchdown games. And then, you know, I have a separate category for rushing upside. But Davis Mills showing some upside in his passing game was kind of impressive. I mean, we have to give this guy credit. We look at some of the games he had, 24.68 versus New England, 20.4 versus the Rams that just won the Super Bowl. 15 to 18 points weeks 14 through 16. And then he finished the season with a great game against the Titans the final week with 301 passing yards and a 3-touchdown game. So Davis Mills showed us a decent amount last year in a system that was terrible, right? You know, Brandon Cooks, that's my guy. You know, I'm one of the biggest Cooks fans. He had him. But outside of that, he had a random showing from a bunch of different guys in that Texan system. So Davis Mills is the guy that you can get for cheap in super flex leagues, I think. Will he be a 10-year starter? I don't know, but will he be the starter this next season? He should be. He should be. I think he earned himself a role with the good games he had. Running back outside of the top 50. So I'm going to go with the same team, and I'm going to throw out a random name here. He said outside the top 50, so we're looking at a small list of guys that are probably free, but I'm going to go Marlon Mack. And I'm not going to say Marlon Mack is like the next, I don't even know how to reference this, but a guy that's going to score weekly 17 fantasy points and be this massive sleeper that finishes inside the top 12. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm saying Marlon Mack is likely free right now. RB 23 in 2018, RB 22 in 2019. He had the Achilles injury that kept him out of football. But we've seen Marlon Mack in the past be decent for fantasy. A top 25 running back is a guy you can roster on your team. Am I saying he's going to finish? Is that on the Texans now? I'm not, but I'm also not saying he doesn't have an opportunity. So the worst thing for Marlon Mack is that, a Breece Hall comes in or a Kenneth Walker comes in, because maybe he gets some work, but it's eventually going to be that guy's team. Right now it's Rex Burkhead and Dare Ogunbowale. David Johnson is a unrestricted free agent. So Houston might take somebody, but I'm taking the chance as a fantasy manager, especially in deeper dynasty leagues, at Marlon Mack, because if he ends up getting 16 touches a game, 15 touches a game, that's worth him having a free price tag right now, because you're going to get those running backs on your team that are banged up. You're going to have weeks with multiple guys on a bye. You're going to have a variety of things that impact your roster. And if this guy ends up getting any sort of volume, I think he's worth a roster spot. So Marlon Mack. Wide receiver outside the top 75, Zay Jones. For me, is a guy I think you can still roster. And I think a lot of people are like shying away from Zay Jones now because he landed on a team that just got, Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram, but I'm not sure that those are the most frightening names in the world. And they still have Laviska Shenault, Marvin Jones. I don't know. I think he's on the team still. But Zay Jones. So after the Raiders bye week in week 8, Zay Jones played 75+% of the snaps in 8 out of 10 games. For the fantasy playoffs, a.k.a. weeks 15 through 17, Zay Jones was a wide receiver 16 overall, and he averaged 14.5 fantasy points during that stretch. Jones was targeted 8+ times in all of the Raiders' final 4 games. So he got a lot of work and a lot of opportunity. Jones had a huge game, week 17 versus the Colts. He caught 8 He had 8 receptions for 120 receiving yards. I was saying earlier before free agency started that I thought he was a buy in Dynasty, because I feel like he earned himself some sort of cash, and there were so many teams that needed a wide receiver. And you can say what you want about the Jaguars and them bringing in some people and not knowing, where guys are going to fit. Obviously Christian Kirk got the bag over there, but Zay Jones' profile's a lot different than those guys. I think he can operate on the outside more consistently than some other guys, because we look at Christian Kirk probably in the slot, Evan Ingram probably in the slot, Laviska Shenault probably in the slot, Zay Jones wide. So will he be a consistent starter in your fantasy lineup? No. Will there be, will there be some weeks where he can be flex worthy? Maybe, and he costs probably nothing right now. Good best ball target, I think, especially in the late rounds. But Zay Jones is still a guy I think you can roster right now. You temper your expectations, but seeing what he did for the Raiders at the end of their season, he got a look from the Jags, got some money, and he got brought in. Tight end, I'm not going to dive too much into this. I've talked about this a handful of times. Talked about Brevin Jordan. I must be a massive Texans fan. Cole Comet, right now, in my opinion, is the target number 2 on the Bears. So seeing him in his connection with Justin Fields, seeing him having a little bit better of a sign of having better receiving yards than he did his rookie season. The touchdowns were missing, but if, targets are there, receiving yards are improving, and the touchdowns are the only thing that's missing, I'd rather have the touchdowns be missing because the other two, I think, are harder to get consistently. Targets are everything for the tight end position. So if he's getting targets and he's getting some better yardage, the touchdowns will come. Logan Thomas is a guy we're all probably forgetting about. He's a guy that has been very good for fantasy. He's not a young gun anymore, but when he's out there, when he's healthy, he's a great player, especially when he's getting some volume. He's going to have Carson Wentz now, who likes his tight ends. Irv Smith, people are hot and cold on him, but another guy that's kind of fallen under the radar. Evan Ingram, we just talked about the Jaguars, but could he have some life? Can he be brought back to life in Jacksonville? To be determined. There's Gerald Everett is another guy that's a sleeper tight end that fell into a good system and might have another resurgence in his potential for what he can do for the fantasy world. So there's a bunch of tight ends that you can label as sleepers that you can give the reasons for. That can be a whole podcast in itself. And the last question here, let me grab this one. I might have to actually type this one out. This one is from Noah Wright, who I had in an article before. All right. So he asks, at what point are you giving up a 2020 first for a 23rd first? For example, would you give up the 22-105 for a random 23 first? So a lot of numbers there. So basically, when would you give up a 2022 draft pick, rookie draft pick, for a random 2023 rookie draft pick? And everybody talks about this 2023 draft class and how great it is and how you should be stacking up on that class versus this class. But the thing, I actually had a DM before the show. I'm not calling that guy out at all. It was a good question, but he asked, would you give up I think it was a 106 in Kadarius Toney for a mid-23 pick? And I told him, you don't know what that pick's going to be like. We can't assume right now we know what anybody's 2023 draft pick is going to be like. The best team in your fantasy league could have a massive injury riddled season, and you thought that they were going to have the 112 in 2023, and now they have one of the top 3 picks, or vice versa. The guy that's like really not good on paper right now in your fantasy league, out of nowhere has the next Pat or CPAT from the Falcons, or the next we can go down the list of guys that overperformed this year for the fantasy world, and now they're like a contender in your league, and their draft pick's not that good. So don't assume what the 2023 draft picks are actually going to be, because we don't know how the season is going to pan out, and we see wild things all the time with injuries and suspensions, like all these different factors. So my big thing is, whatever 23rd pick you're going to be going for, it's completely random. So it can be anywhere from 1 to 12. I'm not super into it, in all honesty. Trading away my draft picks right now for draft picks that can be anywhere. I guess if you have a late 2022 draft pick and somebody is like dying for that pick, then it might be worth your lottery scratch-off ticket of saying, hey, you can have this 110 for your random 23rd, because that random 23rd might be the 101, or it might be the 105 or the 109, or etc. I guess I would think about it with a later draft pick, but I also would look at my fantasy team and say, hey, do I have the luxury of making this move? Because a lot of teams in the leagues I play for really, really need to utilize these picks, whether that means drafting a player or using these current draft picks for a trade that involves getting a player that they can use. So, if you're comfortable with your team not having a pick or using that pick for a trade this year, then maybe you feel more comfortable trading for a 23rd pick. But again, if I have the 105, 106, 107, I'm probably just holding or seeing if I can get a player I can use and a 23rd pick if somebody is dying to draft in this one. So interesting question. I'm not super into trading, picks right now for picks later, even though the class might be better. I think, again, it just depends on the makeup of your fantasy team. And, if you have the luxury of just throwing away an asset to wait, because, again, you don't have to draft with that 106. You can end up trading that 106 for a good value and improving your fantasy team, or you can, utilize it for a team need of yours this season. So interesting question there to say the least, but solo pod, closing things up now. Again, I like to have a mixture of things. I like to host podcasts where I'm just leading the show and other people come in and give their opinions. And then I like doing this. And I feel like people are still listening. I'm looking at the downloads. They're still doing well. So I like having that mixture of me talking too much and then maybe not talking, as much and letting other people talk. But really appreciate you guys tuning into this show, trucking along this off season. And it's always good talking about different topics and mixing things up. That's why I like the mailbag episodes, because I don't want to talk about the same shit everybody else is talking about, because we talk about the same things on fantasy Twitter every single day. Is like a domino effect. So thank you guys for the questions. Thank you guys for tuning in, and be on the lookout for some more content. I'll be plugging away all off season. Have a good night.